It was the kind of morning that made all the hard work worth it. Birds chirped in lazy harmony, the gentle trickle of water from the koi pond filled the air, and the sweet scent of blooming jasmine rolled across the porch of my modest but beautiful suburban home. I sipped coffee from my world's okayest gardener mug and admired the shimmering orange and white fish gliding through the water. Life was calm, rhythmic, and peaceful until Karen moved in next door. Her arrival was anything but subtle. A high-pitched SUV engine, two barking designer dogs, and a shrill voice commanding some poor moving crew around like she owned the block. With oversized sunglasses and a clipboard permanently fused to her hand, she gave off the energy of someone who either ran an underground military operation or thought the HOA was a branch of the Pentagon. I gave her a polite wave. She gave me a once-over like I was a stain on her expensive welcome mat. Our first interaction came just a few days later. I was planting some lavender near the pond when she strutted over in her wedge heels, clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't say hello. She just peered at the fish pond, raised an eyebrow, and declared, "That thing isn't compliant." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what thing?" She jabbed her pen toward the pond. "That water feature. It's an unapproved modification. Page 17 of the HOA bylaws, Section C, all structural water elements must be pre-approved." I looked at her, then at the pond that had been there for 5 years without a single complaint. "It's a fish pond. My koi live there." She sniffed. "Well, it's disruptive. The sound, the smell, my dogs are sensitive. You'll need to have it removed." I laughed, genuinely. Surely this was a joke. But her eyes narrowed behind those bug-eyed glasses and the corner of her mouth curled into the kind of smile that promised war. It wasn't a request. It was the opening shot. The next day, a violation notice was taped to my door. My koi pond, my pride and joy, had been officially flagged. I called the HOA, confused, only to find Karen had somehow been made interim president, temporarily, but with full authority. A neighbor whispered that she basically badgered the old president into stepping down after a 3-hour tirade about mailbox paint colors. That evening I stood by my pond, watching the koi swim under the moonlight, unaware of the battle forming around them. I wasn't about to take this lying down, but I had no idea just how far Karen would go. Not yet. The next few days were filled with passive-aggressive notes, formal letters, and threats of fines stacked like junk mail on my porch. Karen was relentless. She didn't knock. No, that would be too human. She preferred to operate through paper and digital harassment, copying every other board member on her emails filled with buzzwords like non-compliant, eyesore, and urgent corrective action. She even cited potential mosquito hazards from the pond, despite the obvious presence of a flowing water system and fish that ate larvae. I tried being reasonable. I offered to show her the permits and designs from when I first installed the pond. I invited her over to see that there were no health or safety violations. She declined with a sneer and a muttered, "We'll see about that." Her mission wasn't about rules. It was about control. And then came the real blow. I came home one afternoon to find a cement truck parked awkwardly in my driveway. At first I thought it was a mistake, maybe road work or some weird construction mix-up. But no. As I rounded the corner to my backyard, my stomach dropped. There in the middle of my pond was a sludgy gray mass, concrete, wet fresh and already starting to harden. My koi, my beautiful fish, were nowhere in sight. A few watery puddles remained on the edge, but the heart of the pond was choked with cement. I stood frozen, mouth dry, as the driver of the truck casually wiped his hands. "Lady next door said this was part of a code enforcement cleanup," he explained, oblivious to the horror on my face. "Said you were non-compliant and HOA ordered it filled, showed me a form and everything." That form, of course, was forged. I knew it. She had taken it too far, beyond citations and warnings. This was destruction. This was personal. I stormed next door and banged on her door with the fury of 100 angry koi. Karen opened it half an inch, her expression pure smugness. "Oh, I see you found your little situation," she cooed. "Don't worry, I took care of it. You'll thank me when your property value goes up." "You destroyed my pond." "No," she said with that awful smug tone. "I removed a violation." The rage boiled inside me. I could hear the concrete setting in my pond, hard and final. But even then, I knew reacting with fists or yelling would only give her what she wanted. Number Karen wanted a war. She was about to find out that she had picked a fight with the wrong peaceful pond owner. The next morning, I walked out with a coffee in hand, staring at the ghost of what used to be my pond. The concrete slab sat there like a tombstone. It was still damp in the center, mocking me with the steam of drying destruction. I spent an hour just sitting on the edge, mourning my fish, the peace that used to fill my mornings and my dignity. Karen, of course, strutted out to retrieve her mail like she hadn't just committed an aquatic war crime. She even had the gall to wave. Word started spreading fast around the neighborhood. A few neighbors offered sympathetic nods, one even brought over some fresh cookies and an awkward, "We were all hoping she'd move again." Apparently, in the 2 weeks she'd been here, she'd already made enemies with half the block, sending citations for things like non-standard gnome height and unsightly lawn chairs. But none of that compared to what she did to me. Karen's power trip escalated quickly. She began calling in anonymous complaints about everyone. One neighbor was told their shutters were 2 inches too wide. Another was cited for excessive hummingbird feeders. But she saved the worst for me. After the pond, she started pestering about the color of my mulch, the placement of my wind chimes, and even the shape of my mailbox, standard issue, I might add. She was on a mission to dominate the entire block, clipboard clutched like a royal scepter. Every day I'd find new notices taped to my door, each more absurd than the last. She even accused me of suspicious wildlife harboring because a family of ducks waddled across my lawn one morning. Apparently, in Karen's world, even nature needed pre-approval. But what she didn't realize, what she underestimated, was just how patient I could be. I didn't yell. I didn't file a counter-complaint. I waited. I watched. And most importantly, I took notes. I noticed her routines, her obsession with her driveway being spotless, the way she polished her luxury SUV every Sunday like it was a holy relic, and how she constantly barked at delivery drivers to stay on the pavement. One Sunday afternoon, I watched as she screamed at a poor teenager whose tire had nudged her grass. She threatened to call the police over a 6-inch indent. The kid fled like he'd seen a ghost. That's when the idea began to take form, not out of anger but clarity. Poetic justice had started to write itself in my head, smooth and slow, like cement sliding out of a mixer. If she thought she knew concrete, she was about to get a real education. I started by gathering evidence, not just of the pond incident, but of everything. The fake HOA forms, the forged directive to the cement truck company, and the relentless barrage of baseless violations. I went through my doorbell cam footage, which had caught the cement truck pulling in and Karen standing smugly at the edge of my property with a clipboard and a little smirk, directing the driver like she was orchestrating a symphony of sabotage. Then I started talking, quietly, casually. Neighbors who had been victims of her overreach were more than eager to share their own stories, especially once they learned I was compiling it all. One guy even gave me a copy of a letter she sent threatening to evict him for planting petunias that clashed with the neighborhood's color palette. Another woman had been fined for excessive garden gnomes. She had 2. With each story, the file grew fatter. I collected screenshots, recordings, statements, but I knew that just exposing her wouldn't be enough. Karen would find a way to wiggle out, play the victim, cry about just doing her job. No, I needed something more than justice. I needed irony, humor, and a little sprinkle of her own medicine. It was during one of my late-night packing sessions that the plan crystallized in my head. Her obsession with her precious SUV was the key. Every Sunday she parked it perfectly, always at the exact angle, always with the wheels aligned with the edge of the concrete. She would clean it, buff it, polish the rims with a toothbrush. She once left a note on my windshield because she thought my car was too dusty and lowering neighborhood appeal. I laughed just thinking about what was coming. I started laying the groundwork, literally. A few calls, some subtle prep, and a very cooperative local contractor later, I had everything I needed. See, Karen had made it very clear that everything must be up to HOA standards. She insisted that the HOA driveway code be strictly followed down to the inch. What she didn't realize was that the code also permitted repairs and sealing, something I exploited perfectly. With a little help, I arranged for a driveway compliance upgrade to take place early Sunday morning. Right on schedule, all permits were obtained, all boxes ticked, legally flawless. And Karen, She had no clue what was waiting for her. The trap was set, the revenge was ready, and all I had to do was wait for Sunday. Sunday arrived like a scene from a sitcom blessed by the gods of irony. At 5:30 a.m., I was already sipping coffee, watching from my porch as the crew arrived right on time. They were professionals, courteous, and most importantly, very familiar with HOA code enforcement. I had walked them through every detail. Their job was simple: apply a fresh, fully permitted layer of fast-drying, high-grade cement to my neighbor's driveway, while her SUV was parked on it. You see, Karen had a very particular habit. Every Saturday night, she parked her shiny luxury SUV on the driveway and didn't touch it again until her post-church Sunday polish routine around 10 a.m. that gave us a perfect window. By the time she even opened her front door, the job would be done, the cement cured, and her vehicle entombed like a fossil in a suburban time capsule. The cement truck purred like a well-fed cat as the team got to work. Smooth, professional swipes, careful edging around the tires, a flawless finish. They even stamped the date into the corner as required by regulation, March 16th, a date that would go down in neighborhood history. I made sure everything was documented, photos, video, even drone shots from a helpful neighbor. As the final layer set, the crew packed up, gave me a thumbs up, and disappeared like morning fog. And I just sat there on my porch, pretending to read the HOA handbook, sipping from my still okayest gardener mug, waiting for the fireworks. At exactly 9:57 a.m., her front door creaked open. Out came Karen in her signature silk robe and leopard print slippers, clutching a microfiber cloth and a spray bottle like sacred relics. She spotted her car, all sparkly in the morning sun, and then the first sign of confusion. She froze, her head tilted. Then, as she stepped closer, realization bloomed on her face like a slow-motion train wreck. Her shoes tapped the edge of the driveway and stopped. There it was, her precious car, wheels buried in 6 inches of freshly cured concrete. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out at first. She looked around in stunned silence, as if she had stumbled into an alternate dimension. Then came the scream. It started as a gasp, built into a wail, and finally crescendoed into a banshee-like shriek that echoed down the block. I nearly dropped my coffee from laughing. She darted toward the vehicle, clawing at the concrete, yelling things like, "Who did this? My car is glued," and the poetic, "This is an ACT of domestic terrorism." I just waved cheerfully. "Morning, Karen. You said everything needs to be up to code, right? Just helping out." She didn't wave back. Karen's meltdown was a masterpiece. She flailed like a soap opera villain, shrieking about sabotage and legal action as she paced up and down her lawn in fuzzy slippers. Her SUV, now an accidental modern art exhibit, sat quietly embedded in its new cement cradle. She tried to open the driver's door and yank it free, but all she got for her efforts was a popped acrylic nail and a smear of cement dust on her silk robe. The best part? The entire neighborhood started trickling out, drawn by the spectacle. Old Mr. Jenkins came out with his morning paper, squinting at the scene and muttering, "Finally, karma's working overtime." A few others gathered, coffee in hand, pretending to be concerned but clearly enjoying every second. One neighbor even live-streamed it on the community Facebook page under the title, "Karen Meets Cement, a Love Story." When she finally spotted me, calmly pruning my hedges with the serenity of a Buddhist monk, she stormed over, face redder than a boiled lobster. "You did this," she hissed. I blinked innocently. "Me? Oh no, Karen, I just had my property upgraded in full compliance with HOA code. You insisted everything follow the handbook, remember?" "On my driveway, my car is stuck." "Ah, well," I said, holding up the laminated copy of the HOA code she'd given me weeks earlier. "You see, per subsection 4B, any adjacent property upgrades that enhance overall curb appeal are allowed without prior notice if they're non-invasive and conducted within city-approved hours. It's all right here." Her eyes scanned the page, but comprehension wasn't her strong suit when it worked against her. "But my car—" "Oh, right," I cut in. "You parked it on your driveway. That part wasn't my responsibility. But you know, cement takes time to cure. You really should have moved it when the crew arrived. Didn't hear the truck." She sputtered, waving her hands like she was conducting an orchestra of denial. "I'm calling the police." They already came by, I said sweetly. Had to approve the permit. Lovely folks. They even took pictures of the job for the file. Said it was one of the cleanest cement pours they've seen in years. And just like that, the wind went out of her sails. Her mouth flapped silently as she spun around, storming back to her porch to make what I assumed were furious calls to anyone who'd listen. Meanwhile, I resumed trimming my hedge animals. Today was an elephant kind of day. Over the next hour, she tried everything, barking into her phone, attempting to jack the car up with a garden shovel, and even yelling at a local tow truck driver who took one look and said, "Lady, you need a jackhammer, not a tow." Justice, it seemed, had dried just as fast as the cement. Corinne's fury didn't fade, it mutated. She tried to turn the tide by calling an emergency HOA meeting right there on her lawn. She stood on a folding chair, still in her cement-dusted robe, waving her clipboard like a deranged auctioneer. "This is an act of war," she yelled. "He's vandalized my property and violated the peace of this community." Only 3 people showed up. One was her confused husband who had just gotten back from a fishing trip and looked like he regretted everything. The others were curious neighbors who stayed purely for the show. One woman brought popcorn. No one was on Corinne's side. Trying to look official, she held up what she claimed was a violation report against me. "He cemented my car to my driveway," she shouted. "That's your driveway, Corinne," someone called out. "Why didn't you move your car if work was happening?" Corinne turned a shade of purple previously unrecorded by science. I was asleep. He tricked me." "Tricked you into ignoring construction crews and sleeping in until 10. Another neighbor laughed. She lost it. Full meltdown, tears stomping, throwing her clipboard on the ground like a toddler denied a cookie. When someone asked if she'd forged documents to get the pond destroyed, her eyes darted away and she suddenly got real quiet. Too quiet. That's when I stepped in, holding a folder. "Oh, you mean these?" I asked sweetly, opening the folder and showing the copies of the fake forms she'd used to order the concrete dump in my pond. Signed by Corinne herself. Funny how the HOA never actually ordered anything, and neither did the city. They confirmed this signature didn't come from them. She snatched the papers from my hand, skimmed them, then tried to claim I had forged them. "He's framing me, that's not my writing." "Cool," I said calmly, pulling out my phone. "Then I guess the doorbell cam footage of you handing them to the driver is someone else in a blonde wig and oversized sunglasses." Gasps all around. Corinne froze, caught in 4K as the saying goes. Within a day, the real HOA board, which had been mostly absent up to this point, launched a formal review. Apparently enough people had complained that they could no longer ignore her power trip. Corinne was stripped of her acting president title, fined for multiple violations, and hit with the bill for removing the concrete-entombed SUV, which had to be jackhammered out in chunks. That little process was filmed and uploaded by someone with the perfect title. "Corinne gets carved out of karma." Her driveway now resembled a crater. Her car, once her pride, had to be towed away in pieces, and the HOA banned her from submitting complaints for 6 months. Publicly humiliated, she started keeping to herself. No more morning patrols. No more clipboard tyranny. Just an occasional peek through her blinds, watching the neighborhood she once ruled with fear continue living, laughing, and planting colorful garden gnomes. Peace returned like a long-lost friend. The air felt lighter, the mornings brighter, and the chirping birds sounded like they were laughing just a little. I rebuilt my koi pond, not just the same, but better. Deeper, wider, with a gentle waterfall that made a soothing sound all day long. A neighbor donated new koi, another helped me landscape, and suddenly my backyard had become a neighborhood oasis. Even the ducks came back, waddling around like nothing had happened. Corinne, meanwhile, was barely seen. Her once daily routines of patrolling, clipboard in hand, had been replaced by closed curtains and hushed phone calls. Rumor had it she tried to file complaints under a fake name, but after the HOA's little Corinne clause was implemented, yes, they literally called it that, any complaints filed had to be approved by a 3-member committee. Her reign was over. I'd occasionally see her peeking through the blinds, watching as I fed the koi or hosted a little garden party with neighbors. I made a point of waving, always with a smile. Sometimes I wore my new shirt that read, "Concrete Happens." The best part? A few weeks later, her cement-scarred driveway was still under repair. Contractors came and went, shaking their heads at the mess. The crater left by her beloved SUV had to be filled, leveled, and resurfaced at her expense. And because she technically violated HOA rules by forging documents, she also had to pay for the damages to my pond. The check she was forced to write was made out to me with the memo line, "Restitution for fish pond destruction." I had it framed, hung it right next to my pond where I could see it while sipping my coffee. Life had a way of balancing itself out. Justice didn't always come with sirens or courtrooms. Sometimes it arrived in a slow-drying slab of cement and a whole lot of irony. The neighbors started gathering more, planting new flowers, decorating with gnomes of all shapes and sizes. Someone even put up a koi-themed mailbox as a joke. The HOA began working properly again, with actual meetings and fair discussions. It was like Karen's downfall had been the push everyone needed to reclaim their sanity and their yards. As for me, I got my peace back, not just in my garden but in the knowing glance neighbors gave me. The little nods, the quiet laughs, the way they'd say, "Still can't believe you actually did it." And I'd just grin and reply, "She started it." The koi swam lazily beneath the surface. The pond sparkled under the sun, and the only concrete I dealt with now was the solid foundation of neighborly respect. Karen may have tried to drown my peace in cement, but in the end, she was the one who got stuck. Literally. And that's the story of how HOA Karen learned the hard way. Don't mess with someone's fish, unless you want to become part of the driveway.